build a nation where no one suffers or dies from a vaccine-preventable disease. The family physician is at the front and center in the fight for a healthier Filipino family, and becoming an expert in immunization is an integral component of your mission to provide the best care and protection to each member of the family. An evolved family doctor is educated, engaged, and empowered when it comes to preventive health and immunization. This course is an important step towards that goal. At this point, we'd like to call in our moderator for tonight. She is a doctor of medicine with postgraduate internship at the University of Santo Tomas. She finished her family medicine residency at UST Hospital. She is a diplomate and fellow, Philippine Academy of Family Physicians. She is a member, Board of Examiners PAFP 2001 to 2007. Chair, Specialty Board, PAFP 2007 to 2009. Chair, CME and Quality Assurance Committees, National Board of Directors, PAFP 2013, and a Research Committee, PAFP 2014. National Executive Secretary, PAFP 2015 to 2016, and also the Vice President, PAFP 2018 to 2019. She is also an Associate Professor, Faculty of Medicine and Surgery, UST, a family medicine consultant at UST Hospital. She is the Internship Training Coordinator, Department of Family and Community Medicine at UST. She is the Vice President, UST Hospital Medical Staff Association, also the past President, UST Medical Alumni Association, and the current President of the PAFP. Please welcome Dr. Maria Victoria Concepcion Pilares Cruz.
Thank you so much, Sam. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our dear PAFP members. And welcome to part 6 and the final part of the series of this vaccinology course. Over the past weeks, we have covered the different parts of this vaccinology course, from immunology, vaccine development, the general principles in vaccination, vaccine safety, and pharmacovigilance. Last week, we had the vaccine cold chain talk, and this time we will be discussing on communication and advocacy. So this course on vaccinology aims to equip us family physicians on the basics from history and immunology and the different topics that were covered in the past few weeks. There is an increasing and continuous need for improved education in the field of vaccinology. Comprehensive vaccinology training is often not offered as part of university courses, even in medical fields, and consequently, there is insufficient knowledge about vaccine topics, even among healthcare providers. So these courses can actually contribute in strengthening the development, testing, and the use of vaccines. Of course, we know that vaccines are still the most efficient tool for the prevention of infectious diseases. There are preventable diseases, both in developed and developing countries. Yet, there is still high hesitancy for vaccination for a variety of reasons among the population. It's time for us healthcare professionals, especially family physicians, to more actively educate our patients about the vital importance of vaccines. Family physicians have the responsibility to protect public health. We are at the front lines with our patients and their families and often spend a great deal of time with them. Every visit is actually an opportunity to open the lines of communication. It's our responsibility to make sure every patient has accurate information about safety and efficacy of vaccines, and that also means encouraging our patients to express their concerns about vaccines, maybe ask their questions at every appointment, every time, and without us being judgmental about this. So I'm sure you will have many questions still unanswered, and hopefully that this will be answered as we go through the last course of this vaccinology course. And the PAFP as an organization, of course, we always aim for excellence and quality primary care to all Filipino families. So let's continue to equip ourselves with the knowledge on vaccines And physicians being one of the most trusted healthcare professionals, let us not miss on that opportunity given to us to be vaccine educators and advocates. So tonight we have a speaker who is probably very familiar to you. She has appeared in numerous interviews on television and news, no, especially during this COVID pandemic. I have even been with her in some interviews in the past, no. So let me introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Anna Ong Lim. Dr. Anna Ong Lim is a professor of pediatrics, College of Medicine at PGH, University of the Philippines, Manila. She is the immediate past president of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society of the Philippines. She is a member of the World Health Organization Measuring Behavioral and Social Drivers of COVID-19 Vaccines Working Group. And she is also a member of both the COVID Technical Advisory Group and the IATF Task Force on COVID-19 Variants. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, please give a warm welcome to the virtual floor to Dr. Anna Ong Lim.
Good evening, Dr. Marivic, and good evening to the membership of the PAFP. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight and to have this opportunity to communicate with you because being in the forefront of the care of families, I know you've had many opportunities to discuss vaccines among your patients. And if your experience is anything like mine, this can be at some point very friendly, very how would you put interactive, no? Or at times, pwede ring kulang na lang na kagatin mo yung dila mo kasi gusto mo nang mapikon o magalit. And it really captures the range of responses that we have right now to vaccines from people who are accepting, who understand the benefits that vaccines can provide, to those who are fence-sitters, to those who are outright anti-vaxxers. And yet we realize that it's our role, as physicians, as healthcare advocates, to be able to communicate the benefits and risks of vaccination in a balanced way so that people will be able to have the opportunity to make decisions that are appropriate for their circumstances. So what I'd like to do for the rest of this session is to focus on effective communication for these different vaccine conversations that we usually have in the clinical setting. We are in a way, or we are in a setting where people are questioning vaccination more and more. And yet, we are also in a setting where vaccines are going to be a critical part of how we will be able to address many infectious diseases, not just the typical vaccine-preventable diseases that we have focused on in the past, but also the problem of the current pandemic. We have been in this situation for the past 18 months. Different countries have had different success rates in terms of controlling the pandemic, utilizing various permutations of the PDITR strategy. But I know we've all been keeping up with the news. And we also see that only after vaccines have been deployed effectively in certain countries have they been able to actually turn the tide around, so to speak, and really make a difference in terms of how they are controlling disease spread within their communities. So part of our role is actually to improve the public's acceptance of vaccination. And to be able to do that, we must be able to also increase the awareness about vaccines, and not just to communicate the benefits, but also to be able to share a realistic view of the risks. Now, the problem is that there are many challenges to effective communication. In settings where infectious diseases are no longer common, it becomes a challenge to actually talk about these diseases, let alone preventing them. No, so maybe some of us have the opportunity to talk to trainees, students, and residents. And sometimes don't you feel it's so challenging to be able to describe measles to them kasi di na nila to nakita, no? So ano ngayon ang dahilan para kailangan magpabakuna against measles? So this is precisely the situation now in many high-income countries where they haven't even seen these infectious diseases. Yet we're telling them their kids have to be vaccinated. So this decline is a challenge. Likewise, or associated with this is the perception that certain diseases are things of the past. They're no longer an issue. Like, for example, polio. It's not a problem in many, many countries. Ilan na lang ang bansang merong polio. So, anong silbi na kailangan nating magbakuna pa rin against polio? Another challenge is the introduction of new vaccines. No? Ang dami actually. No? Taon-taon na lang may naidadagdag dun sa vaccination calendar. And this particular additions or these additions sometimes will require a lot of updating, a lot of review in terms of basic principles of vaccination, the platforms used, and it can be difficult not to be able to communicate this information in a language that the lay community will be able to understand and not oversimplify it. Finally, there has to be transparency and accountability in all of these communications. Hindi natin pwede na lang sabihin na or just paint a rosy picture about vaccines because we know that knowledge is still evolving and there may be instances where particular risks have to be accepted and to be able to obtain the benefits. And yet we have to get the person who will be vaccinated to be the one to make this decision with the appropriate level of information and understanding. So dito pa lang, ang dami na nating pwedeng pag-usapan, ang dami ng challenges na kailangang bunuin. Pero siguro, no, so that we can have a little bit of structure to this discussion, let me just share with you the learning objectives that we have for this session. First, which is recognizing the importance of improving communication strategies regarding vaccination, specifically the concern of vaccine safety. Second, evaluating and assessing new vaccine information critically before communicating this with the intended audience. Third, we want to learn how to create messages that can convey the information about vaccine safety to the target audience. Next, we need to learn how to determine which methods and channels of communication are most effective to the various target groups. And finally, we want to be conscious about creating an environment where knowledge of vaccines and their role in health is embedded in the culture. So once again, no, a challenging set of objectives for just the next few minutes, and I hope no, we will be able to achieve these objectives. So a lot of the issues associated with vaccination has to do with the concept of vaccine safety, and critical to this is the concept of risk communication. So risk communication is defined as an exchange of information, advice, or opinions between experts and the people who face a threat or hazard to their survival, health, economic, or social well-being. So you have on the one hand, the people who are conveying the information, and on the other hand, the recipients of the information who are at risk. And as an example, or rather, the objective of the communication is actually for everyone to be able to make these decisions in an informed manner so that they can act on it and protect themselves and prevent the impact of the threat. So you have to transform, or the objectives of risk communication are to transform these concepts and the information into a decision so that action can be taken. Risk communication is actually a very important part of the public health response. And during an emergency, it's very important that we are able to provide effective and timely communication, especially when the situation is rapidly evolving and the demand for information is particularly high. So maybe to illustrate this point, I'd like us to think back to December 2019 or January of 2020. Imagine natin, nasan ba tayo noong mga panahon na yon? Ano ba yung ginagawa natin? I recall at that time, being in infectious disease, actually just half hearing the news coming from China. Kasi sanay naman tayong makarinig ng kung ano-ano sakit na lumilitaw galing doon, di ba? Kaya nung nabalitaan na merong mga napipick up na cluster of cases, in my head, siguro another avian flu yan. Kasi di naman unheard of sa kanila. Pero habang tumatakbo yung mga araw, and particularly around the Christmas holidays and right after, parang palakas ng palakas yung ugong. Maybe not here, but certainly in the infectious disease circles, where there was a growing awareness that this was not something that was following the usual pattern. And there was more and more concern being raised. I particularly remember this because I'm also part of a school community. And by the time January rolled around, there was a lot of concern, particularly February, there was a lot of concern because there was a lot of travel around the Lunar New Year holidays. And many people were coming back from different Asian countries where there was already a bit of a louder noise about the issues with COVID-19. So at that time, it became necessary to preemptively communicate certain information to that community that I was part of to forestall panic. And I don't know if you were able to monitor this, but there were certain schools, particularly in the Binondo community, that actually shut down because of the rumors that were going around about people traveling and being exposed. So at that time, siguro dahil maliit pa lang yung community na involved, hindi siguro ganun kaganda yung risk communication na nangyari within that community. But certainly, kinailangan talagang magkaroon ng magandang response. Kasi nga, lalo na in this age where you have so many social media platforms, yung chismis hindi na lang nanggagaling sa isang tao papunta sa kasunod. May isang nag-share, kung malaki ang kanyang network, kalat na kalat kaagad yung balita. And we know how quickly things like this can go out of hand. So if risk communication was an integral part or is always or has always been an integral part of the public health response, lalo pa siguro ngayon in this age where news really flies, that bago pa lumabas ang balita, dapat meron na tayong nakahandang communication plan para ma-address yung iba't ibang responses na inaasahan natin. And therefore, ang risk communication even in the context of vaccines and vaccination, will require a multidisciplinary approach. Hindi pwedeng parati na lang ang pinambabangga natin sa informational needs ay knowledge. Kasi dahil maraming iba't ibang klaseng responses that can be expected, we also need to communicate at different levels depending on the concerns that are being brought up. So, kitang-kita dito yung need for a multidisciplinary approach through, for example, media, traditional media rather, social media, or mass awareness campaigns, or even community engagements, so that the different sectors can be addressed with utilizing different platforms and addressing different needs. Aside from a multidisciplinary approach, we also need to understand that there has to be an integrated model for risk communication. So, it's become quite a science actually, no? Hindi na lang yung very reactive ang response natin. Kung hindi, kailangan ina-anticipate natin kung ano yung mga communications needs ng ating mga kinakausap. So this involves dynamic listening and rumor management. So in the communications jargon, they have something like social listening, where they monitor yung mga themes and topics that are being discussed on social media and use that as a clue to determine what topics and what issues need to be addressed. And this dynamic listening and rumor management feeds into risk communication systems where you have internal communication and coordination with the information agencies and partner communication and coordination so that they create a plan that is fed to the public, which then leads to an engagement with the affected communities para malaman kung effective ba yung ating risk communication through, once again, listening and rumor management. So umiikot itong mga to so that we can actually address the concerns that are being brought up by the public and eventually provide a sense of, I would say, control from the individual to the communities and also to the public health agencies that are engaged in this cycle. I guess kasi ang pinaka-problema dito is that if you don't manage the situation, there's a danger that things will get out of hand and misinformation will take over, and it might not become possible to restore, or rather reverse this particular misinformation that is being shared. I will have to convey my apologies to Sanofi, but the best example I have for this is the Dengbaksha issue. And sorry, talagang I think this is something that everybody can relate to. So if you'll allow me to just allude to it a little bit, alam naman natin na ang science behind the dengue vaccine is very solid. And in fact, maraming bansang gumagamit pa rin ng bakunang ito. And yet, because of a chain of events that led to issues focusing on risk communication, we ended up as a country not being able to benefit from this vaccine because until now it is not registered with the FDA. No? So maraming factors that came into play to actually lead to this chain of events. But I would say that at different points in this cycle, siguro kung nagkaroon pa ng mas magandang opportunity to revisit it, who knows whether naiba yung kwento. So, there are many building blocks to risk communication. And yung sinasabi natin kanina na hindi lang information parati ang need, nakikita natin dito. Kasi out of the different building blocks that are stated here, out of the 5, alin ba dito yung knowledge ang ina-address? Iisa lang yung number 3, which is technical information. Everything else is qualitative, no? It's credibility, building trust, engaging about values, and providing an expression of care. And when we focus on just providing technical information without regard for the other building blocks, I think we realize that we are not as effective as we could possibly be. I'm sure meron tayong mga instances na naiisip ngayon na meron tayong kinakausap na gusto nating mag-engage regarding vaccines, pero hindi natin sila ma-penetrate, parang hindi tayo nag-uusap on the same wavelength. Maari kasing ang akala natin, ang kailangan lang niya information when in fact ang hinahanap niya reassurance. Or ang hinahanap niya is marinig itong information na ito from someone that they feel is credible, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the guiding principles include not just providing the information, but also to create and maintain trust, to acknowledge and communicate even the uncertainties about vaccines, no, since that's our topic for today, coordination, no, across different sectors, and being proactive, meaning being transparent, being fast. You head off the misinformation, uunahan mo na. Kasi mahirap na ngang sumagot kung naunahan ka na ng chismis. It's necessary to be proactive. It's necessary to involve and engage all those who are affected. Kailangan ng integrated approaches across different platforms. And hindi lang ito individual communications or local communications, but there is to build capacity and ownership across the wider community. Now, understanding that risk communication is an important component to address vaccine safety, and understanding that risk communication does not only involve providing information but addressing all of these affective qualities like trust and credibility and so on and so forth, then we also need to be able to select the best risk communication strategy. Yun nga, kasi hindi naman pare-pareho yung kailangan ng bawat tao at hindi rin pare-pareho ang responses nila dun sa communication methods na ginagamit natin. So, paano natin gagawin itong pagpili ng risk communication strategy? So, unang-una, kailangan nating i-assess yung risk. Pangalawa, we have to recognize na ang risk perception natin at risk perception ng apektadong tao ay magkaiba. And we have to gauge, no, and calibrate the response. And finally, after using those, or rather evaluating these assessments and risk perception, we need naman to go to a selection of 1 of 4 risk communication strategies which might best fit the particular situation. So, yung assessment of the risk involves looking at questions like, is this a big or small hazard? Is this something that happens in the future or is imminent? What are the levels of exposure to be expected for this particular hazard? What is the vulnerability of the population versus their capacity to deal with the threat? And what are the resources available? So siguro dito naman, let me suggest to you a particular scenario na pwede niyong i-keep in mind
I
habang
have to look better than this.
tinitignan natin itong next few slides. No? Alam natin na isa sa mga bakunang ginagamit ngayon, merong associated risk for development of blood clots or vaccine-induced thrombocytopenic thrombosis or VIPT. So, kung tayo siguro ang magko-communicate nitong risk na ito, sasabihin natin, that happens in 4 per million doses. It might not even happen to you. Pwede kang ma-expose kasi babakunahan ka, pero kung ikaw ay 55 years old na, halos wala na yung risk. At kung maaga kang na-diagnose or na-recognize ka agad itong VIPT event sa iyo, meron namang pwedeng igamot at pwedeng ma-reverse yung impact. That's from the medical side. Pero, kung titignan naman natin, so ito na yon, no? Yung risk perception natin as clinicians, tinitignan natin ano ba yung risk ng morbidity and mortality, disability, or some kind of loss. Pero, as people, ang tinitignan nila, ito ba ay controllable? Ito ba ay makakamatay sa akin? Meron ba akong options? May iba pa ba akong choices? Sulit ba? No? Is it a fair trade-off? Is the risk that I'm going to encounter something that will resolve or become chronic? So, iba yung ating mga standards, ibang ating gauge. And therefore, we need to be conscious that we're not imposing the standards that we have on the people who are receiving the communication because their concerns may overlap but are probably different or prioritized differently compared to how we as clinicians and scientists appreciate the data. So, after assessing the risk, pupunta naman tayo doon sa number 2, which is gauging risk perception, and number 3, selecting one of the 4 risk communication strategies. So dito, we will see that we need to balance the emotional response of the at-risk population and the actual hazard to which they are being exposed. So makikita natin dito that there are 4 quadrants that we might need to address or we might need to focus on. And of course, you expect na pwedeng hindi proportionate, no? Yung response, yung emotional response dun sa actual hazard. Kasi pwede nating makita dito na kahit maliit yung hazard, pwedeng walang masyadong response, dead ma lang, or pwedeng outrage ka agad kasi nga natabunan na or nadagdagan na ng kung ano-anong misinformation yung situation. Or pwede rin namang napakalaki ng hazard and yet wala ng response, no? Yung tao, maaring nanawa na sila dun sa threat, no? Like now, di ba, sinasabi natin bakit hindi na sumusunod ang mga tao sa minimum public health standards when in fact importante pa rin na maging consistent sa paggamit ng mask and shield. And yet, ang dami natin nakikitang hindi na nagko-comply. No? So, nandito siya eh. wala tayong emotional response pero ang laki ng hazard. On the other hand, ito sana yung appropriate, di ba? Na malaki yung hazard, maganda yung tama yung level ng emotional response para appropriate din yung intervention ng mga tao. So, kung sakasakali na we are in this square where the hazard is big, but there is a muted response, kailangan iakyat natin itong response level from here, from the apathy side, to outrage para ma-concern sila, di ba? We typically do this by sharing anong pwedeng mangyari kung hindi ka sumunod sa minimum public health standards. Pwede kang mahawa, pwedeng mahawa ang pamilya mo, pwedeng mamatay kung meron silang mga risk factors. And typically, we use emotional communication techniques here so that we are able to prevent a secondary crisis. Basically, we're telling people, watch out, baka may mangyari pagka hindi mo to ginawa. Ngayon naman, kung inappropriate din, disproportional yung response, na hyper na pero hindi naman pala malaki yung hazard, ang kailangan naman natin is to calm people down, but to do this with respect. I think this is actually quite challenging, especially if we are in a position where we have a lot more knowledge compared to the people that we're talking to. Kasi pwedeng ang mangyari nito, ang dating natin, very patronizing. Parang without saying so, ang dating natin is, di ka ba nakakaintindi? No? And we don't want that. Kasi syempre, paano naman natin maiengganyo yung tao na makinig kung yung ating communications are already adversarial from the start. So, typically, kung nakikita natin na ito yung problema, masyadong disproportional yung response and yet the hazard is really small, then we listen, we acknowledge what's truthful about what they understand. We can communicate facts with the objective of calming people down. Kung sakasakali naman na tama naman yung response niya, malaki ang hazard, and nandoon na nga siya sa tamang degree ng emotional response, pwede naman natin silang pakalmahin din kasi syempre alam din natin na pagka nandito sila sa area na to, pwedeng wala na silang action because napaparalyze sila sa takot. So pwede nating i-explain kung ano yung nangyayari. We deal with the emotions. We can utilize the strategy of saying that we're all in this together and we can help each other so that this response becomes can be maintained at an appropriate level and yet can be effective in driving towards a positive action. And finally, kung nandito naman sa kabilang end ng appropriate response where meron kang small hazard, muted response, then what we need to do here is to continue to engage in surveillance, look at early signs of outrage, lalo na kung may mga nanggagatong, no? May mga trolls, na alam naman natin yan. And try to address any such issues early on. So, balikan natin yung napag-usapan na natin kanina. Sabi natin, malaking issue sa vaccination ang concept ng safety. Para ma-address natin ang vaccine safety, we need to understand the concept of risk communication. Dapat alam natin na multi-stakeholder ito at hindi lang knowledge ang ating tinututukan, kung hindi maraming qualitative aspects. Nakita rin natin na may iba't ibang degrees of responses and we need to balance an understanding of the hazard and the response and to modulate these responses so that they become appropriate and monitor the responses. So putting that all together, we then go to moving from vaccine to vaccination by being aware of the 5 A's of successful vaccine uptake. So vaccine coverage goes up if we are able to provide access, address affordability, maintain awareness, nurture the acceptance, and finally, convert all of this to action. And to be more specific, when we talk about access or ICANN, this addresses the ability of individuals to be reached by or to reach the recommended vaccines. Siguro sa ating mga clinical practice, may mga panahon na rin na nakakarinig tayo ng mga nanay, for example, who will say, hindi ko talaga magawang mapabakunahan yung anak ko kasi napakalayo ng local health center. Para makarating ako doon, maghapon akong dapat bumiyahe, and it's just not possible, no? Or maaring nakatira sila sa mga conflict areas na hindi na safe yung magpabakuna. Or in the current context of the COVID-19 vaccines, nandiyan nga yung bakuna, pero hindi makarating dun sa sectors ng population na gustong-gusto nang magpabakuna. Like what we hear from certain A4 people na sinasabi nila, gusto ko nga magpabakuna, bakit ayaw niyo akong bigyan? No? So they are not yet qualified, and that's also an access issue. Pwede rin namang affordability ang problema, no? Hindi lang porket libre ang bakuna in our public health setting ay afford na dapat siya ng ating mga kababayan. Kasi being able to afford the vaccines also involves opportunity costs. For example, kung ikaw ay nanay na nagtatrabaho at ikaw lang ang pwedeng magdala ng anak mo sa local health center, minsan iisipin mo, mag-a-absent ba ako today at ifo-forgo ko yung sweldo ko para masiguro magpapabakuna or makapagpabakuna yung anak ko. And that's also quite a critical question that needs to be answered. No? Hindi lang yung lumalabas sa bulsa nila para magbayad ng pamasahe, kundi yung mawawala sa kanila kasi ginawa nila or nag-proceed sila with the vaccination process. Next is awareness. No? Kailangan i-reinforce yung knowledge ng individuals, communities, and the entire society about recommended vaccines. So tulad ngayon, I think wala na sigurong hindi pa nakakaintindi or nakakaalam na kailangan ng bakuna against COVID-19. Pero marami pa ring hindi nakakaalam, for example, nung proseso kung paano sila makakapag-register for the vaccination process or maisasama sa master listing. So hindi lang yung awareness about the vaccine but the processes that go into being able to access the vaccine. Meron ding concern about acceptance, no? Which is referring to the intention to get vaccinated where there is access to and awareness of an affordable vaccine. And finally, there's activation, which refers to actions that nudge people to take the final step to vaccination. So kung babalikan natin ulit yung diagram kanina, medyo kailangan magkaroon ng magandang balanse once again between these different components of successful vaccination uptake. Hindi lang natin iisipin na ito lang ang kailangan, no? Basta magpapakuna ka lang. Kung hindi, intindihin natin that we have to go through maybe not all of these processes, but certainly at least some of these processes to be able to convert vaccine to vaccination. Kasi ito naman talaga ang target natin, yung matanggap ng mga tao yung bakuna, hindi lang yung magkaroon ng bakuna, kundi actually mabakunahan yung mga pasyente and all the individuals who qualify to be vaccinated. So, if we compare the 10 biggest threats to global health in 2019 with the more recent list coming from the WHO that they prepared in 2020, makikita natin dito na kinilala na talaga yung vaccine hesitancy as early as 2019 as a really big problem. And in 2020, the issue is not just vaccine hesitancy, but an issue now of trust. No? And we recognize that to be able to go forward to acceptance of vaccination, we need to address vaccine hesitancy, which is defined as a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines despite the availability of vaccination services. So, isang mahalagang concept is actually to recognize that there is such a thing as a continuum of vaccine acceptance. Hindi pare-pareho ang lahat ng tao in terms of their degree of vaccine hesitancy. May mga taong refuse all, kahit ano pa yan, kahit bago or luma, hindi talaga sila magpapabakuna. And fortunately, typically, konti lang itong population na to, pegged at less than 2%. There are those who refuse, pero nararamdaman mo na pwede mo silang makumbinse kasi hindi sila very sure. Di nila alam kung bakit nila ayaw, pero ayaw nila. May iba na combination, no? They are hesitant, they will delay, they will refuse some, they will delay others. There's some that they will accept but they're unsure. And there's the other end of the spectrum, which is accept all vaccines. Again, in the past, no, I would say that the majority of the Philippine population were probably within this category, accepting. And in fact, if you think about it, no, siguro mga 5 years before, kung may kinakausap tayo tungkol sa mga bakuna, ang sagot parati sa atin ng mga pasyente natin is, Doc, sige kung ano sa tingin mo ang maayos, okay ako dyan. Pero siguro over time, nagkaroon nga ng maraming challenges ang ating vaccination system. So, nababawasan, no, itong nasa accepting category, meron silang tumadami siguro yung nandito sa hesitant. At mabuti naman na hindi naman sobrang dami itong nandito sa red zone, yung refuse all. So, para ma-address natin yung vaccine hesitancy, we need to understand it a little better. Kumbaga, para makapagbigay tayo ng management, meron tayong diagnosis. So, hesitancy can be viewed as a reflection of a decision-making process and factors that can influence the decision of a person to accept some or all vaccines in accordance with the recommended schedule. And hesitancy is brought about by an interplay of factors like confidence, convenience, and complacency. So makikita natin dito na maaring dahil wala na silang nakikitang sakit tulad ng polio or measles, ayaw na nila ng bakuna. So this is complacency. Dahil marami silang nabalitaan tungkol sa measles vaccine and autism, nawawalan sila ng confidence. Maaari ding dahil napaka-challenging para dun sa tao na ma-access yung bakuna, and it's really very inconvenient to be vaccinated, ay umaayaw sila sa bakuna. So I guess the point here is that we cannot assume that only one factor is in play whenever we perceive a person to be vaccine hesitant. Kailangan nating malaman kung saan nanggagaling yung hesitation niya para mabigyan natin ng tamang sagot so that we can convert this hesitant behavior into a decision for vaccination. So, maraming proposed models about vaccine hesitancy, and the one I showed you is just one model. Meron ding nagsasabi na ang combination ng disinformation coming from social networks and adding to or in addition to mistrust in the system, in government, in public health, can be the equation that comes into play for vaccine hesitancy. And I think for some people, this can be the scenario. No? Hindi lang yung interplay ng complacency, convenience, and confidence. Kung hindi, sa kanila mas matimbang itong dalawang factors na ito to create vaccine hesitancy. Regardless, I guess the point is that we need to recognize that facts alone will not change minds, and information and education alone will not change beliefs or behaviors. Madalas, yung nakakapagkumbinsi sa tao to actually make a decision for vaccination is not data or evidence, but anecdotes and stories. And this is because sometimes we have cognitive dissonance where we see what we believe rather than believing what we see. So I let that statement sink in first so we can understand the difference. Kumbaga, dahil meron na tayong preconceived notion, yun na yung nakikita natin and not the other way around. Pwede ring nakakakita tayo ng causal relationship when in fact, certain events are merely coincidental, and there are also expectations that influence us or social norms that come into play that affect how we act. So, recognizing these elements that play into cognitive dissonance should support the understanding that hindi nga pwedeng information na lang ang ating sinishare kasi facts alone do not change minds. So, putting all of those details together, ano ngayon ang pwede nating gawin to make concrete steps to be able to communicate risk appropriately and also to be able to ensure or rather move, no, somebody who is hesitant over to the side of a decision for vaccination. There are many strategies that can be used, but I'd like to share this AIMS conversation method that you might find useful as you encounter patients who are vaccine hesitant. We are told that we should actually assume that people are ready to vaccinate, start with a statement, not a question, and announce that vaccination will happen. Hindi natin tinatanong, magpapabakuna ka ba ngayon? Ang sasabihin natin, may bakuna kang nakaschedule ngayong araw na ito. Pangalawa, kung sakasakali na nag-express ng hesitancy yung kausap natin, we can inquire by asking open-ended questions, applying active listening, and seeking to understand the person by asking them about their concerns. We need to make sure that we understand what they're saying, and we also need to make sure they know we understand them by mirroring. So kung may sinabi sa atin, kailangan makapture natin yung sinabi sa atin, i-communicate back natin dun sa tao para alam niyang naiintindihan natin siya and verifying kung tama ba ang pagkakaintindi natin dun sa sinabi niya. And the way you respond to a concern will actually determine whether trust is built and whether or not a decision for vaccination happens. The goal is to conclude every conversation by securing trust. Pwedeng hindi ka naging successful ngayong araw na ito, pero sa susunod na encounter, hopefully, pwedeng magkaroon na ng mas magandang desisyon yung ating pasyente. Now, I know this is very difficult to do, and I myself, no, parang I have to really control my responses because there are really some people na alam mo hindi na kayo nagko-communicate on the same level. And maybe I will add no na hindi naman kasalanan natin kung hindi natin sila makumbinsing magpabakuna. Kasi in the end, decision pa rin nila yan. So ang pwede lang talaga nating gawin is to check ourselves and find out whether we were able to give our best shot at communicating appropriately. And if they still refuse to be vaccinated, then in the end, it is their decision. No? So siguro yung isang pwede nating tandaan, talo ang pikon, medyo mas madaling sabihin ngayon kaysa pagkaharap na natin yung pasyente, pero totoo, di ba? Kasi kung naunahan na tayo ng galit or ng pagkakainis, lalong walang pupuntahan yung pinag-uusapan. We're also being reminded that it's very important to inoculate against misinformation. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Mahalaga daw na pangunahan na natin yung mga maling kwentong ina-anticipate natin. Actually, medyo mahirap kasi ngayon kung ano-ano na yung lumalabas na kwento na wala nang ka-basis-basis. No? Pero siguro, yung mga nalalaman na nating mga storyang umiikot, pwede na natin pangunahan by providing an upfront warning or to expose a fallacy or a misinformation because this stimulates counter-arguments that prevent misinformation from being embedded in the person's consciousness. We want to provide alternative correct information. We can also highlight certain techniques that are used by anti-vaxxers. And finally, we can also share some underlying motivations that anti-vaxxers actually have, no? That serve their vested interests. So, in the process of utilizing the AIMS method, pwede nating idagdag din ito, no? Addressing misinformation so that the communication becomes even more effective. Isa pang pwede nating gawin is actually to contribute to the vaccine conversation on social media and news sites. I have to say also that when I heard about this, I think in 2018, no, when I had the opportunity to attend trainer's training course for that was run by the International Pediatric Association. I was really very averse to doing this because I felt that this could make me a target for bashers and trolls. But the scale of this pandemic is so unprecedented that I felt like I really didn't have that much of a choice. And that I also needed to use the voice that I'd been given to move the conversation forward. I guess there may be some of you who are also in the same situation, yung nag-aalangan na magsalita for the same fears and reasons. And I have to say na it's a reality, no? Pwede ka talagang maging target. Pero siguro ang pwede na lang nating isipin or ang dapat nating isipin is if we don't do this, the space, the vacuum that's created will be filled by people who are taking the opportunity to spread false information. So kailangan nating tignan, no, kung saan tayo pwedeng maging active in contributing to these vaccine conversations, whether by sharing content or contributing an article or a comment in different sites, or to post comments about balanced stories in news media, or to actually write articles and share stories so that the correct information, there's more correct information out there that can be shared and multiplied. Hindi kailangang parating content ang sinishare natin. I think nung nagsisimula pa lang yung vaccine rollout, siguro marami sa mga kaibigan or kamag-anak nating hindi healthcare professionals. Tinitignan tayo kung anong gagawin natin, kung magpapabakuna ba tayo, kung aling bakuna ang tatanggapin natin. So, even just posting about your own experiences regarding vaccination can already provide positive feedback and encouragement, and also, again, fill the space, fill the vacuum with stories that are truthful, factual, and contributes to vaccine uptake. I remember when I posted this set of pictures. Actually, this is the second vaccination already. I posted about the first dose I got. I was vaccinated on March 2. And I posted, I think, March 4. Kasi medyo nagdalawang isip pa rin ako. I have to tell you that. No? Medyo nagdalawang isip ako talaga kung dapat ko bang i-post ito. Kasi parang ang feeling ko nang iinggit ako. Pero in the end, ang dami kasi talagang nagtatanong, Doc, nagpabakuna ka na ba? And I think it generated some more confidence in vaccination. There were lots of comments about even healthcare workers who were looking at whether their colleagues would be vaccinated. And all of us, I guess, who posted, contributed to an improved uptake such that now I think we're close to about high 80s in terms of percentage for healthcare worker coverage. So, siguro yung point ko dito is that lahat tayo may boses. And lahat tayo pwedeng mag-contribute towards creating a positive atmosphere for vaccine uptake. Huwag nating maliitin yung influence natin within our circles and even in bigger circles, because healthcare workers are still a trusted source of information, and seeing us be vaccinated will encourage others to do the same. Pwedeng i-post yung sariling experience, pwedeng mag-share ng interesting articles, sabi nga pwedeng mag-comment, no? Or pwedeng sumulat ng sari-sariling articles. I'm sure marami sa atin are very gifted in terms of communication, and pwede natin gamitin yung talent na yan para i-drive yung conversation about vaccines. Finally, as marami ding mga institutions that are actually also moving this conversation forward, and marami silang content na very shareable, no? Pwede nating, kung hindi natin magawa yung tayo mismo ang susulat for whatever reason, pwede naman nating palawakin din or palakihin yung reach ng information that's already being generated by these credible sources. So siguro with that, no, I know I've left you with a lot of food for thought, and I hope this is something that will help you, no, as you move forward towards more effective vaccine communication with the patients that you're engaging with. Maraming iba't ibang aspetong kailangan isipin, pero siguro kung may isa akong iiwan sa inyo, ang gusto kong maalala ninyo is hindi lang information ang hinahanap ng pasyente. And bilang family physician, alam kong naiintindihan niyan. So siguro dapat magkaroon lang tayo ng consciousness na hindi lang to applicable in other aspects, but also in the aspect of vaccine communication. So with that, let me thank you for your attention and open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anna Ang Lim, for a very informative lecture. We would like to once again call our moderator, Dr. Maria Victoria Concepcion Pilares Cruz, as we open our Q&A session. Doctors, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A button in our Zoom webinar. Doc, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sam. So we're back, and we have some questions here in the chat box, no? But actually, the talk of Dr. Anna is very extensive na, no? About how to communicate, about vaccines, the importance of vaccines, how to address vaccine hesitancy, no? Pero meron pa rin tayong mga tanong dito, Dr. Anna. So maybe I can throw you some of these questions that our participants have entered into the Q&A box. So one of the comments or questions is asking actually for your comment about mga shared texts, no? Na those who receive COVID-19 vaccines have 2 years to live na lang, no? So mga nananakot, may mga conspiracy theory, no? So how do you address that, Dr. Anna?
So that's so distressing, di ba, Dr. Marivic?
Yes.
Ito yung medyo bagong umiikot ngayon eh. So alam niyo, may natutunan ako kay Dr. Bravo. Nabanggit niya recently, pagka yung balitang narinig mo ay nakakakos ng takot sa'yo, magdalawang isip ka na kung totoo yan o hindi. And that's for us as we consume information, and maybe as we share that also with other people. No? Now, to address that particular bit of information more specifically, actually rehashed post yan. It was actually being shared years ago. And definitely, hindi siya applicable sa COVID-19 vaccine kasi kailan lang ba tayo nagkaroon ng COVID-19 vaccine, di ba? So, na-rehash itong particular na kwento na ito na unang-una, taken out of context. So, kawawa naman tong mamang to na misquote. Tapos, pangalawa, ginamit nga lang yung kwento tungkol dun sa vaccine, sa COVID-19 vaccines na hindi naman talaga yun yung tinutukoy niya. So siguro yung bigger question of, so how do you address the misinformation? Well, kung meron tayong pwedeng i-share na article specifically refuting yung kwentong yon, yun ang pinakamadali, no? And alam nyo, hindi mahirap hanapin yan online. All you have to do is type in the keywords and then look at and add fact check. No, yung phrase na yon. Doon mo lang nga hanapin yun sa Google, marami ka nang mababasang article na you don't even have to compose your response yourself. Yung article na lang addressing that misinformation ang i-share natin. Mas madali. Now, kung sakasakaling wala tayong makita, pwede naman tayong mag-call a friend na tanungin, paano ko ba ito sasagutin, no? Minsan meron ng may mga sumasagot sa ganyan kasi mabilis nga kumalat eh. And they're willing to share their response to you, and you can just share that particular post, no? Para mas madali. Actually, siguro, sasabihin ko na si Edsel, ang galing-galing niyan. Si Edsel Salvania, basahin nyo lang yung wall niya. Ang dami-dami niyang ganun. Share nyo lang yun, no? So, isa talaga siya sa mga, I would say, sobrang tinding vaccine advocate. And he uses, yun nga, magandang information to be able to refute all of these mga chismis and kwento. So, maraming ganun, pwede nating i-share, gamitin, pangontra. Pero yun na, babalik na naman tayo dun sa knowledge ba talaga ang problema? No? So kung kunwari kilala mo yung nag-share ng information, baka kailangan tawagan, kausapin, make them aware na, naman medyo nakakatakot naman yung mga pinag-share mo. May problema, ano ba problema? Baka pwede kitang tulungan, no? Saka I think yung isa pa, parang particularly vulnerable yung senior population, no? Napapansin ba ninyo yun?
Yes.
So, nakakalungkot. Tapos sila pa mismo yung kailangan talaga nating bigyan ng bakuna. Sila pa yung very prone to disinformation, and sila pa yung mahilig mang-share ng mga kwento-kwento. So, kailangan talaga silang i-address.
Yes, that's very true. Minsan, ang hirap din i-address yung mga ganyang mga katanungan, ano? Siguro, is there a way for us to have parang consistency of message, like especially among healthcare professionals, no? You did mention Edsel. I always share whatever he shares with regards to his comments kasi talagang on
point.
Yeah, that's right. It's on point. So I do like sharing his comments. So I think
marami tayong fans ni Edsel.
Yeah. I mean, the health professionals, you have to have a consistent message kasi minsan baka tayo rin yung nagkokos ng nag-i-increase ng hesitancy because hindi consistent yung messages natin.
Pwede ko bang sabihin, hay nako, di ba? Totoo namang hay nako.
Oo. How about the IATF? Do they really have a risk communication plan? Parang kasing nakukulangan. That's why we have all these problems about vaccine hesitancy.
Meron naman. They actually have a communications media unit that is actually very, very active. May mga messaging. So, they engage in all of these. Yung sinasabi ko kanina, yung parang cycle, social listening, tapos feedback loop, ganon, meron yun. Nakatuwa nga kasi parang I didn't imagine that this whole science behind communications is actually also already embedded in the Department of Health. So, nandiyan siya. Siguro yung kailangan ng is calibration, no? Maybe sa tingin nila effective yung dating nung kino-communicate nila, baka sa ibang tao kulang, no? So pwede rin naman natin silang bigyan ng feedback na parang hindi yata nakakarating tong message mo dun sa audiences na intended, no? Para makapag-revise naman sila ng messaging strategies. Pero nandoon, kaya nga kung pupuntahan natin yung DOH website, Dr. Marivic, di ba daming content?
Yeah.
Parang sa isang araw siguro hindi lang 10 yung posts. Tapos ang daming laman. Nakakahilo nga di ba? Kung alin ang share.
Ang hirap na i-track.
Totoo.
Actually, yun nga, parang meron pa rin, I think may kulang pa rin. Of course, you said na meron naman silang arm for risk communication, no? But like for example, we have members who are municipal health officers, and they're actually asking some help from the organization because na alam nila na mataas yung vaccine hesitancy dun sa mga areas nila. And of course, syempre, what we can only do now is what we're doing, no? Webinar, lay fora, kasi hindi naman tayo pwedeng lumabas doon and talk to people face to face, no? So, what do you think are other, like for example, for medical organizations like us, how can we effectively advocate for vaccination without putting our members at risk?
At risk. Oo. Actually, same problem din namin yan sa PIDS, saka sa PPS, di ba? I think that's really, we all have the same intention. We want to bring the communication to our audiences, and yet we're limited by this particular medium, no? Alam mo, merong sineshare si Professor Nina Carandang. She's a social scientist who is also with the National Immunization Technical Advisory Group. And she says, we have very heavy communications across social media channels, pero yung hindi nasa social media, hindi natin nararating. Paano yung mga nakikinig ng radyo, walang internet? Very substantial proportion yan ng population.
Yeah, that's true.
So siguro, no, isang pwedeng maging focus ng PAFP is to bring that advocacy to other channels. Kasi yun nga, very heavy na tayo dito sa mga webinar platforms, sa social media, which typically target your A and B. Iba usapan dun, di ba? Dun sa CDEF, kung may F, di ba? CDEF, ibang usapan. Parang kung pupunta ako sa vaccination center today, hindi ako makakapasok sa trabaho, wala akong sweldo. Mga ganun ang level of discussion, and yet we have to be able to motivate people na totoo, tinatanggap natin yan na hindi ka talaga susweldo ngayong araw na to, pero ang kapalit naman nun, di ka magkakasakit, di ka ma-hospital, di ka mamumulubit, di ka mamamatay. So parang ganyan, di ba, yung tono ng conversation. So maybe one of the things that PAFP can do is to bring this to another channel, maybe radio, no, and partner with these stations and provide the content, because of course, healthcare professionals are very well respected, and I'm sure the family physician is at the forefront of communicating these informations.
That's true, Dr. Ana. I think actual experience naman yan na lalo na sa rural areas, no? Radyo talaga yung main source of information eh. Hindi television dahil walang cable TV, no? So it's really radio because it's more accessible. They can bring it anywhere. So we will look at partnering with radio stations.
Yes. Naalala, so Doc Marivic, di ba, nabanggit mo kanina, we were on an interview together.
Yes.
And that was like, sino ba yun? Di ba, sino kaya nakapanood nun? I'm sure A and B na nakakaintindi na. So bakit ba natin sila kailangan kausapin? Bakit hindi yung ibang hindi nagpapabakuna? Di ba dapat sila yung inaabot natin?
Bombarded na sila, no?
Yes, oo.
We need to target the other social classes. There's a question here. This is probably one of the things that is hard to explain also to patients, no? Na yung vaccine may EUA pero hindi siya FDA approved, no? So how can you convince them na this is going to be safe? Pag naririnig kasi nila, emergency use authorization lang ang meron yung bakuna, hindi pa siya FDA approved.
Okay. So sa akin, maganda, no, may awareness yung mga tao na kailangan may FDA approval para masabi talaga natin maayos ang isang produkto. So pwede nating ipaliwanag na yung emergency use authorization, approval siya in the context na meron tayong emergency ngayon dahil may pandemic. Tapos, ginagamit natin yung best available na evidence tungkol dun sa bisa at safety ng bakuna na hawak natin sa ngayon para mapakinabangan na natin habang binubuo pa or tinatapos pa yung mga studies Kasi nga, ayaw na nating madagdagan pa yung almost 4 million na namatay at 180 million na nagkasakit. Kasi kung aantayin pa natin na lumabas yung FDA approval, baka 3 taon pa ang bibilangin. So dahil may emergency, pinapayagan na natin ang paggamit ng bakuna. So basically explaining under what circumstances ba nagagrant tong EUA para magkaroon sila ng kumpiyansa na hindi naman natin binaliwala yung issues about safety and efficacy.
Nako, Doktora Ana, merong mga tao na pag narinig nila na kasi meron pang actually patuloy pa yung pag-aaral dito sa mga vaccine na to. Yun na yung agad tumatatak sa utak nila na ay, meron pa pala, hindi pa pala tapos yung studies about this vaccine. So bakit ako magpapabakuna? Ganun.
Tama din naman, di ba? Kasi sinasabi naman natin parati, bago natin tanggapin ang kahit na anong gamot o bakuna, dapat maganda ang evidence, no? So siguro dito na magbabalance ng risk communication. Kasi 'di ba sinasabi natin, pwede naman kung gusto mo talagang antayin na matapos yung mga studies, pero siguro mga 2-3 taon pa yan. In the meantime, nandiyan yung real risk na pwede kang mahawa sa pang-araw-araw mong pagkilos. So, tignan natin, gaano ba ka-realistic na mahawaan ka? Gaano ba kalaki yung risk kung ikaw ay nahawaan? So, medyo ganun yung process siguro ng discussion.
Okay, there's a question here from Dr. Carolina Fernandez, and she wanted to ask, will there be adverse effect if the second dose of the vaccine will be delayed, say, for more than a week or so?
Currently, kasi the recommendations are, for intervals rather, are really based on the experience generated from the trials. But we also have knowledge about how these platforms work, because many of the vaccines utilize technologies that are already familiar to us and are used for other vaccines. So, quoting from those experiences, typically a delay does not impact in terms of safety. It may impact efficacy. But because all of these vaccines that we have now in the market are inactivated vaccines, you expect that delaying the subsequent dose will not be likely to cause a decrease in the efficacy. And in fact, based on experience with at least, sabihin ko na lang, the AstraZeneca vaccine, no? Nagsimula yung trials niyan na 4-week interval nung unang-una. Tapos eventually, ano na tayo ngayon, di ba? 12 weeks na tayo. So nakikita natin that nagpe-play out talaga yung principle na you can generate an anamnestic response even if you delay or you increase the interval between doses. And in some cases, it makes for an even better response.
Yes, that's true. So, thank you for that answer, Dr. Ana. Meron naman akong question dito. Paano kung yung doctor ang anti-vaxxer? Tapos actively siya talagang nag-promote against vaccination in all media, social media platforms, even on radio? Yun ang tanong ni Dr. Remo.
Kalungkot, no? May mga ganun. Actually, may isa tayong colleague ngayon na kinikilalang may ganung klaseng issue, no? And in fact, hindi lang naman dito yan sa atin. Sa iba't ibang bansa, may mga ganun din. Siguro, ang pwede nating strategy dyan, kung kunwari naaabot niya yung mga pasyente natin, no? Tapos yun ang pinapakita sa atin ng mga pasyente na, Doc, itong si Doc ganito, kilalang-kilala yan sa community nila, tapos sinasabi niya na hindi safe yung bakuna or hindi effective or hindi naman dapat yan ang gamitin. pwede din naman natin silang ituro sa ibang credible sources, no? And also point out the fact that global authorities actually recommend this. Hindi lang nag-iisa yung nagsasabing ligtas at mabisa ang bakuna, kung hindi napakaraming iba't ibang organizations, no? At lalo na for the COVID-19 vaccines, pwede na nating ipakita yung real world experience na may mga bansa na ngayon na dahil na-cover na nila yung substantial proportion of their population, that they're also now able to restore their freedoms of movement. They're able to restart their economies safely because more and more people are protected, no, already by the vaccines. So siguro, ang strategy will be to counter with equally credible or even more credible sources of information.
Yes. I hope that answers the question of Dr. Remo. Actually, meron din ng mga members kami na hindi pa nga nagpapabakuna. So we also need to convince, no, among our members who do not want to be vaccinated yet. So there is this latest ruling, di po ba, Dr. Ana, about yung those who are returning home, like the travelers, na assuming na they have already been fully vaccinated against COVID, and yet bakit daw po they still need to undergo 7-day hotel quarantine and then have to undergo an RT-PCR on their 5th day from their arrival?
Yes. Alam nyo kasi, yung data na meron natin ngayon for efficacy generally addresses impact on disease severity and mortality risk. Yung data natin for transmission blockage is still just coming in. And the data that we have that's better supported by the numbers are confined primarily to Pfizer and Moderna. I'm not aware that there's any AZ data coming out. Certainly, there's no Sinovac data or very minimal Sinovac data. So, para sa atin, issue din yung question about verification of vaccination status. Kasi wala pang globally accepted document na pag ipakita ng tao, sasabihin natin legitimate yan at totoong nabakunahan siya. So, binabalanse natin yan lahat ngayon. Looking at ano yung pwede nating gawin to recognize na meron na talagang mga taong bakunado na at okay naman talaga yung documentation nila versus the status of information that we have about transmission versus what's reasonable in terms of implementing a quarantine policy. Kaya nag-e-evolve siya, di ba? Sa simula, 14 days talaga. Kaya naging 7. Eventually, sana kung magkakaroon na tayo ng reliable documentation, baka pwede na nga talagang pag may maipakita kang document, hindi ka na kailangan mag-quarantine. Pero medyo may bibilangin pa tayong panahon para mangyari.
Okay. Yung pagre-report ng side effects or reactogenic effects from the vaccine, sometimes it also causes some degree of anxiety dun sa na isipin nila, bakit kailangan kong mag-report? Parang lalo silang kinakabahan na dahil ba talagang may inaabangan sila magiging adverse effect, di ba? Pwede kasing ganun yung pag-iisip ng mga tao eh. So how do we address that?
Ang problema kasi hindi tayo sanay mag-report ng adverse events. Kasi talaga naman dapat ganun ang sistema, di ba? So very, how would you put this? Very rudimentary pa yung knowledge ng ating public about vaccine adverse event reporting. So sa totoo lang, kasama dapat talaga siya ng sistema ng kahit na anong bakuna na pag may naramdaman ka, magre-report ka sa doktor tapos responsibility ni doctor na makarating yung information na yun dun sa NAFIC. Tapos nagkataon pa bago itong bakunang to, kaya siguro naisip ng mga tao, ano ba yan? Talagang binabantayan, ang dami pang hindi alam. So I guess what can happen is we can inform people na this is really standard process, hindi lang siya naka-highlight dati, no? And again, dahil nga bago itong bakuna, dagdag siyang pag-iingat para kung meron nga tayong makita na kakaibang nangyayari, pwedeng ma-address. Pwede rin natin gamitin yung experience ng ibang mga bansa. No? Actually, yung blood clot na yan, di ba? Kaya yan na-pick up kasi merong working adverse event surveillance system in many countries that were able to pick this up and to report it. And at the same time, dahil meron tayong ongoing na NAPIC, kaya nating sabihin na tayo walang kaso kasi meron tayong reporting system din. So, siguro to counter yung takot na baka may inaabangan, ang sagot is dapat talagang ganon. And therefore, mag-contribute tayo ng experience natin.
Yes, they could be contributing to the data that needs to be collected.
Correct.
Yes, thank you for that. There's a question here from our statement rather. The problem with the current immunization is that experts can't guarantee that those who would be vaccinated won't be infected. And when infected, can still transmit disease. So yun nga hindi na mag-guarantee na hindi naman sila magkaka-COVID. Ang mag-guarantee lang natin is hindi magiging severe yung COVID nila or hindi sila mamamatay sa COVID. So isa pa rin yun sa mga concerns sa mga tao, bakit ayaw magpabakuna. Hindi naman pala 100% guarantee na hindi ako magkaka-COVID. So yun ang gusto nila na hindi talaga sila magka-COVID, that reassurance. Pero right now, we cannot give that reassurance, right?
Nako. Siguro maganda lang yung mood ko ngayon, Dr. Maridi, kaya napapangiti ako kasi minsan pag naririnig ko yun, nagiinit yung ulo ko eh. Kasi di ba, masama pa ba yun na hindi ka mamatay o magkaroon ng matinding COVID? Masama pa yun. Di ba? I think parang realistic lang yung expectation natin. Hindi lang naman ito yung bakuna na hindi nakaka-prevent ng infection, di ba? Kung magpabakuna tayo against flu, hindi naman kinagaranti ng flu vaccine na hindi ka magkakatrangkaso. Sinasabi lang nun, hindi ka ma-ospital. So, ganun din naman to, di ba? Parang wag naman natin hanapan ng milagro. 12 months pa nga lang yung experience, kaya na niyang i-prevent yung death at saka severe disease. Ayaw pa natin yon.
Malaking bagay na yun.
Oo, di ba?
Na ating namamatay sa COVID, lalo
so
na. So,
changing the perspective, I think making the expectations realistic can also be helpful.
Okay, so thank you. This is another question. For patients who are at high risk of blood clots, like OCP users, chronic smokers, should we advise them not to take the Astra vaccine and choose other brands of vaccine?
So unfortunately, yung risk factors that are identified for the development of blood clots in a person who is not vaccinated are not the same mechanisms that operate for the risk of development of blood clots following AZ vaccination. Kaya nga hindi natin ma-isolate eh. Kasi kung ganun lang, di ba sinabi na nila, lahat na nag-OCP, lahat na nag-smoke, wag na kayo mag-AZ. Walang ganung recommendation kasi wala ngang association. So, ang kaya lang gawin ngayon is, may mga countries na sinasabi nila, below a certain age group, wag niyong gamitin. Kasi kung i-compare mo yung risk versus benefit, mas lamang yung risk. May countries na ganun. I think si Denmark ba yun? Si Denmark yata ganun yung ginawa nila. Yung ibang mga bansa, sinasabi nila, proactive reporting. Monitor mo yung mga pasyenteng nakatanggap ng AZ within 1 to 2 weeks post-vaccination. Pag nag-develop sila ng symptoms, consult, increase awareness of your health system na pwede silang VIPT, and then institute appropriate treatment. So, ganun yung mitigation ng ibang mga systems.
Okay. So, another issue, Dr. Ana, is yung pagiging choosy ng mga patients. Diba? Naghihintay pa sila nung dumating yung Moderna, yung Pfizer. Tayo, whatever comes first, diba? Tayong mga healthcare professionals. Pero yung iba, naghihintay talaga sila and dahil sa paghihintay nila, sila pa yung na-expose ngayon sa COVID. So how do we convince them? Ako sinasabi ko na lang, just get the vaccine that that is offered to you, and then siguro sa booster, tsaka ka na lang mag-Moderna and Pfizer kasi by that time na you will need a booster, palagay ko madami ng Moderna and Pfizer dito sa Pilipinas. Pero ngayon, kung ano yung available, yun yung i-accept mo. Yun ang gawin mong magpapakuna ka for that, di ba?
Yes, no? So parang yung underlying na message na gusto nating i-relay is kung ang basis natin for making decisions, kung anong brand yung gusto nating matanggap, will be based on efficacy and safety. Ang problema dito is that dahil tumatakbo pa yung studies, yung mga numbers na pinagko-compare natin, nagbabago pa yan. Pangalawa, hindi naman fair na i-compare yung mga bakuna in terms of their efficacy because hindi naman dinesign yung trials to be able to answer that question. Hindi head-to-head yung comparison. Ang mga comparisons niyan is vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Hindi vaccinated with brand A versus vaccinated with brand B. At kung naiintindihan, dahil nakakaintindi tayo ng clinical research, alam natin na iba ang sagot dyan, no? Hindi pareho yung analysis na kailangan pagdaanan ng data para maging reliable yung numbers. So I guess yung kino-communicate natin sa mga pasyente is unang-una, the efficacy and safety numbers are still evolving, but lahat yan sila nakapasa dun sa at least minimum standard ng efficacy and safety at lahat sila ay mabisa at ligtas. Tapos nakikita na natin ngayon sa iba't ibang bansa kung saan ginagamit ang mga bakuna kahit anong brand pa yan, merong impact on severity and mortality. Pangatlo, yung dahil iba't iba yung settings kung saan ginamit yung mga bakuna, iba't iba yung rates of disease sa community kung kailan nila ginamit, iba't iba yung mga taong isinali nila sa trial, iba't iba yung outcome measures, hindi pwedeng i-compare yung mga numbers na generate nila. And finally, nasa sayo kung gusto mo mag-intay, pero in the end, ang kailangan mo pa rin timbangin is ano ba yung risk sa akin kung naghintay ako. Kasi kung sa kahintay ko, magkasakit na ako at hindi ko naman magagaranti na makakaligtas ako galing sa sakit, worth it ba yung paghihintay?
Yes, that's very true. So, are you willing to risk your life? Diba? Yes. I saw a raised hand. Dr. Fritza So, would you like to ask your question? Turn on your microphone. Is it permitted? Can we allow Dr. Rhoda C. Paul and Dr. Fritza So? Let's take the question from Dr. Fritza So, if she can turn on her microphone. Dr. So? Okay, how about Dr. Rhoda C. Paul? Would you like to ask your question? Your hand is also raised. Okay, medyo nagkakahiyaan yata. Anyway.
Tayo lang naman.
Oo nga. Wag na po kayo mahiya. Tayo lang.
Tayo lang naman.
Para lang tayo nagkukwentuhan dito.
Yes.
Really, I really want like the part where you in your lecture na it's not really just the knowledge that you have to provide or information that you have to provide to your patients, no? You have to really address kung ano yung mga emotions, concerns, fears nila underlying those yung kanilang hesitancy, no? Kasi like for example, for us, no, sa family med, meron kaming mga counseling, meron din kaming mga counseling techniques Yung mga CEA namin, yung we really need to identify those emotionally critical misperceptions in order to be able to educate our patient, correct those misperceptions, para para yung decision nila, di ba? Tama yung gagawin nilang decision. And that will be translated into action. So, very relevant talaga sa aming mga family physicians.
Yeah. Actually, I think among the different specialties, no, parang you're in a very good position to actually address ganitong klaseng concepts about vaccine hesitancy. Kasi yun nga, kaparte talaga ng training ng family medicine yung looking at all of these responses and trying to include it in the diagnosis. No? And I have to say, with the hesitancy, hindi knowledge halos di ba? I'm sure kung imagine niyo yung pinakamahirap ninyong kausapin about vaccination, kahit na binato mo na ng 200% pang information, hindi talaga, walang pinuntahan yung pag-uusap niyo. In the end, you just have to agree to disagree na basta ginawa mo na yung dapat mong ginawa tapos, wala, ayaw niya
Yes.
Di ba?
Yes, pero for us doctors, we really need to be role models, to be advocates, di ba? To be vaccine advocates. Importante na tayo muna magpabakuna, di ba?
Oh yes, oo. Of course. At saka, totoo namang nasa risk tayo, di ba? Parang gusto ba natin yun na tayo pa mahawaan? Siguro one thing I can share also, no? Well, anecdotal data. Pero, hindi ko alam kung dapat kong i-claim. Kasi medyo PGH, di ba, highly vaccinated population kasi nauna talaga dahil dun sa sa being COVID referral center. Pero kung i-monitor mo yung healthcare worker positive rates, medyo nag-slow down talaga siya ng gusto. So ako, personally, I'm looking at this as nag-make ng difference talaga yung vaccination. Kasi dati nagka-clusters pa Ngayon parang isa-isa na lang yung nadadagdag. May mga araw nga na walang additional positive test
Okay. So, we really need to just speed up then the vaccination process and kung merong mga areas talaga na meron bang information ng IATF, like for example, itong barangay na to halos walang gusto magpabakuna dito, is there a way of getting information about which communities? Kasi we have chapters all over the country. We could actually siguro help target some of these communities.
Maganda yan, no, Dr. Marivic, para targeted yung information campaign. Hindi si IATF siguro yung magkakaroon ng information ng LGU. So maybe one approach can be the chapters can coordinate closely with the LGUs. Tapos yung nabanggit mo nga, kung may area na hindi talaga na-reach, baka kailangan silang kausapin. Pwedeng mag-create ng virtual town hall with them. No? Gandang idea.
Okay. Well, I think we'll do that.
Yeah.
Kailangan nating ma-reach yung herd immunity, di ba? Or at least a greater percentage, if not
Actually, siguro if I can share total very substantial audience na rin naman to at makakatulong din dun sa messaging. Kasi yung herd immunity na yan, imagine 70 million people. Parang nakalula, di ba? Nakalula talaga. Kasi taon-taon na lang, ano ba yung ating target pediatric population coverage? 2.7 million. Di natin nabubuo yun. So, paano pa kaya yung 70 million, di ba? Tapos ang kasama pa dito, yung mga hindi nagpapabakuna, adults yan lahat. Saka elderly. Siyempre na din sila naging part ng ating national immunization program. Bata halos lahat at saka mga buntis yung binabakunahan natin. So unang-una, hindi tayo nakaset up for that. Kaya nga iba yung programang ginagamit. Tapos ibang audience din yung tina-target natin. So siguro yung isang importanteng tandaan, sige, tina-target naman talaga natin yung herd immunity na yan. Pero huwag natin kalimutan yung reachable target, yung seniors. Kasi yun pa lang, kailangan na natin silang, kung napakunahan natin sila, kahit dumami pa yung kaso, basta wag lang silang ma-ospital, hindi na natin kailangan ulit mag-lockdown. Kasi kaya lang naman tayo nagla-lockdown dahil napupuno yung mga ospital. So kung wala nang magpapa-ospital kasi bakunado na sila, hindi mo na kailangan mag-lockdown, tama?
The herd immunity is very ideal, pero parang tuntok sa buwan, ano?
Matagal pa yan.
Let us just be realistic and
Yes.
the
The highest risk, the vulnerables, yes, correct.
Yes. Okay, so I think we had a very good discussion about how to address all this communication, how to communicate on the importance of vaccination, how to advocate for this. And I think, as you said, family physicians being the ones who are really in the front lines and in the local communities can do a substantial contribution to increasing the vaccine acceptance, no? Na kailangan natin talaga ngayon. Kung hindi tayo makakabalik sa dati as even to a new normal, di ba?
Yes.
Hindi tayo makakabalik. It will take years for us. So we really need to work hand in hand. So any last word, Dr. Ana, before we close? Any part?
Parang gusto kong sabihin, wag matakot, makibaka. Kailangan di ba? Pero hindi, I mean, joking aside, kailangan talaga. So, let's recognize that we have a voice. Let's use the voice. Whether it's in a big circle, a big social circle, a big network, or even among our family members, the communities that we work in, let's recognize na as healthcare workers, meron tayong pwedeng iambag, gamitin natin yung boses natin para makatulong tayo to move this agenda forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ana. Very well said. So I hope na this will not be our last time together, that we can invite you again sometime. Sure. Sige. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Ana Onglim, for giving us a very comprehensive lecture and of course, very thorough discussion and exchanges that we've just had. So thank you so much. We'll turn it over back to our MC, our host. Sam, are you back there?
Thank you very much.